Welcome if you signed up for Film Criticism 405 level. It's a Harvard Coursera USC Calarts adjunct program. And there's good news. The professorship at Calarts is sealed. Somehow Calarts got a hold of me again and said that I had some kind of administration use there, but that I'm still an underling is beyond a understatement. But I have in my hand a box set that was real hard to track down, and I wanted to talk about it because we've got a ton of films to go through, and I'm sorry for being so brief in the early stages of this program and only having programmed 4 or 5 20-minute episodes to start with, and then it turns into these rock hard 30 to an hour minute, and most of them are an hour, and really we have about 8 or 9 more hours left in the semester to discuss films. So what we don't get to this semester we'll go into next semester, and by the time we've gone through a year of this, we should have a lot covered, almost everything that we need to for a while, but it could go on well into the second or third year even to finish the total amount of what we'd need to talk about in terms of movies. That we go slow is not really that true, because although on one video I praised Close Up and Puppet Master, not the horror film from Full Moon, mind you, the Ho Xiaoxin Chinese movie, which both are great movies, but the Ho Xiaoxin one's the one that has opium use in the film, and it's imported film, so you're like, well, they can use opium in the film because it's legal in China, but it's not legal in America, or maybe it is. I don't really look into that. Personally, I smoke weed. Anyway, Silent Ozu is got 3 movies, and they're all silent. And what's weird is I think I told you, but in 1931, 1932, 1933, in Japan, they were still making silent films. And now that there were silent films in China is no surprise, because everyone knows there's that movie, The Goddess in Chinese, and it's like, it's mid-20s or something, and it's weird because like this chick gets like beat up by a ghost, and you can actually feel a ghost kick your ass from out of the screen. It's weird. But this one is Silent Ozu, and I didn't understand like the meaning of Ozu until I really looked at this book that I checked out once called David Bordwell's Ozu, Poetics of the Art of Cinema. And I read all of it, and I got out of it this style that you can totally use. And I know Spike Lee uses a lot of Ozu cuts where there's like a 180 frame, and you get the frame perfectly balanced and cast the character in the middle, whether you're on a mid-close-up or an establishing shot of the frame. There's these squares, and it reminds me of this Dreyer movie, Carl Theodor Dreyer we discussed. He made that movie Master of the House, and we'll look at that. We'll look at that box later, not today, but in Master of the House, he's using these like square parameters to kind of bunch off the sides and make this silent film look like it's taking place from box to box, that the boxes are leaping on each other, that it's like an inverted tic-tac-toe, like everything's colliding into the same box and coming back to the room where he's sitting in. But in these films, they're just late silent films. Not all theaters were wired for sound right after The Jazz Singer came out. And oh man, I just got to tell you, I've been studying a lot about D.W. Griffith since I'm the chair holder at USC. And again, I must say, quite an underling. But I saw this documentary on how, and I think even Ken Burns may have mentioned this, but he didn't really talk about Griffith, of course. But D.W. Griffith and Louis Armstrong were best friends in the war. They fought together. They were both commanders in World War I and World War II. That Louis Armstrong was still working, and D.W. Griffith had faced 3 blacklists. House of Un-American Activities was coming after him, and the studios were coming after him, and the strikers were coming after him, and the Klan was coming after him, and it looked like the end of one of his last-minute rescue movies, only until the Army picked him up, which John Ford would follow in that tradition and not shoot down Akira Kurosawa from the sky in another interview, but we'll get to that. But Silent Ozu is interesting because we talked about I Was Born Button. It's the one that's remade into Floating Weeds by the Ozu. It's the same director, and it's the best remake a director did of his own movie since Hitchcock did The Man Who Knew Too Much twice. But I Was Born But's really the masterpiece of all these Zoo movies, because it films in that slow frame quarter, but these are kids on a rites of passage that finally get a TV so their dad can watch sumo wrestling. But guess what? In this one, it's not a TV, it's a theatrical projector, because TVs weren't quite invented yet. But in Japan, they had prototypes. Now, the prototypes in Japan, I've heard they had a gun for the Nintendo since like 1935 or even before. And I can't quote that direct source, but I've heard they've had Nintendos around since like 1930 in Japan. And I don't know if I believe that or not, because wouldn't they want to market it? And how could they market it in a non-capitalist environment? And was Japanese always capitalist? But it certainly is post-World War II, after a huge earthquake that a nuclear bomb sets off. And they're just now making Seven Samurai in 1950, but you got to understand, these were in the 30s. And like I said, Jazz Singer was going to be directed by D.W. Griffiths, featuring Louis Armstrong. And it was going to be this epic movie, and they were just going to rock it out with Louis Armstrong tunes and have Griffiths try to make up for his being racist once again and failing miserably and ending up even more racist than he already was. And war made him even more racist, of course. But he was always friends with Louis Armstrong. They fought together. It was weird how everybody laid down their differences to fight a battle in the war. And when they got back home, it was like, parting is such sweet sorrow, Louis, that I got to go face the paramount destruction of the antitrust decision and the Legion of Decency and the Production Code Administration and the do's and do nots and be carefuls and the fact that reefer madness made weed illegal, even though we all know Griffith made weed illegal for soldiers after World War II, and Louis Armstrong was the one he was working for. But that none of Griffith's original plans really ever worked out isn't totally true. I mean, at least they built United Artists to last all the way through to Heaven's Gate. I mean, if the Spartacus debacle didn't take down every studio in Hollywood, then I think we're okay. But I Was Born has these theatrical home theater projection. And remember, if you think about film and what it is, if you look at the Stanley Cavell, The World Viewed, it's a great book on cinema. He defines cinema in a way that I think you should note down. He says cinema is an automatic progression of successive images. Automatic, that means it goes on its own once you hit the start button. Succession, that means one after the other after the other. Projection, that means there's a beam of light that's casting the shadow of the print onto the wall, but it's got color in it too because it passes through color filters in the projector that match the color filters in the film stock, and everything's groovy on the screen. And bingo, bango, boingo, it's a magic show. And they're sitting there staring at these projectors, however they were set up, and it was before TV, and they're watching these projectors, but these kids get really into it, and they become like they're stuck on a Nintendo game or something, and they can't get away from the TV. And finally he breaks them all up, and there's a sort of class structure that's defined between the guy and the guy that buys his kids the projector and his boss who plays projector movies at his house, and how the kids kind of get along, but the rich kids and the poor kids, and the rich boss and the poor boss don't always get together. But they're not really unfriendly with each other, and they don't really have to seem like they're in a different section of the corporate ladder, that they can actually get along and do business and whatever else. That the poor kids aren't really even that poor and have an amazing time watching trains go by, which trains going by in a kids movie, I mean, you gotta have that. And that it's a kids movie by Ozu, and Ozu was making detective films around the time of the late silent era for Japan. That Al Jolson started in The Jazz Singer. The version that we'll look at later in 1927 was such a big hit, even though, again, Al Jolson was wearing blackface. So how are we going to explain that to our kids? Well, it's a great movie, but the guy is wearing blackface in it. It's like, that's a little hard to explain. Because I'm going to get to Birth of a Nation here in a little bit, and we're not going to talk about it that much, because I already wrote the BFI book about it and went through the USC chairholder. I'm your Griffith go-to guy. But that Richard Schickel's written more about Griffith is true. and other critics and so forth. And I think even Leonard Maltin's written a spell or two on Ozu and Griffith. The Tokyo Chorus is a really good film, and is another one that seems to be remade later by Ozu, and which one, I don't know, late summer, late spring. But it's a beautiful movie, Tokyo Chorus, and it's really one of those films that kind of poetically goes by, and the poetics of cinema couldn't be further from the truth, because these are not just the poetics of cinema, these are the poetics of poetics. Now, we remember that Aristotle's Poetics was the first version of a drama book about like what makes a theater play work really well, and he does say climaxes and conflict resolution and linear stories that move along a time axis that are transitioned through movements and action commands are the typical play, but to create that you need a reality created through the play, like mimesis. And mimesis is where you're imitating reality to the point that your reality becomes the reality, a meta-reality or an above reality to the reality that already exists. And now the audience is seeing with the movement and the speech commands which way to look on the stage and what place to focus on and whatever else. And the mimesis becomes so real that you get more used to seeing a reenacted version of something that may not have been originally shot in the right way. And I think that poetics tells us of catharsis, which is conflict resolution, practically creating endorphins in the brain. It's like something snaps when the climax is coming and you're going up the roller coaster. And then conflict resolution is when you drop off, go all the way down. That's the climax. And then you go all the way down, and then you pull into the start, and you're back at the beginning of the train tracks, and that's conflict resolution. And something in your brain says, I just conquered that movie. I just found the ending. I found the secret ending to Pulp Fiction, that movie has two endings and goes backwards in one part is totally true. You know, you can come up with all these conjectures. But the poetics is like catharsis and mimesis. That there's a lot of walking in these films with the kids. There's these long walks. And that Ozu is really, even Wardwell doesn't put it enough, that he's all about the long walk. The old couple in Tokyo Story, that's kind of another version of Tokyo Chorus, dies on a long walk. I mean, the lady dies on a long walk, and the whole family mourns for her for the rest of the movie, and everybody's crying. And the cast is similar in these films. I know Chishu Ryu appeared in a lot of Ozu films even later on, in the color Ozu films. And the projector is replaced by a TV, by the way. That's why I got that wrong, is because in Floating Weeds, the guy gets a TV set up so he can watch sumo wrestling. But again, the kids become so obsessed with the TV, they get grounded from the TV and have to go on an adventure where they see a train go by, and it's more exciting than the TV, except the dad is totally into sumo wrestling. And it's the one film, like I already explained on our TV episode, that doesn't say TV is a lower genre than film. Because first of all, they're using film to show a movie, and I Was Born but in the TV version of Floating Weeds, the TV is totally like God of the living room. Like the TV is God. And we all know these days the TV is God. And so we'll just, I Was Born but should really be called, but the projector is God, and Floating Weeds should be called TVs are God. And now we all know from watching Quentin Tarantino on how to use a remote, which he did really put that video out somewhere on the web. I don't know if it's on YouTube. But as we've all learned from that, the remote is the magic wand. And if you cast Harry Potterisms through the remote, you'll be amazed at what narrowcasting channels you'll see. Now, a quick TV note, narrowcasting is when the broadcast is so thin on how they know their target audience is going to be that it's pretty much what you find on TV that's marketed directly toward you. And by you, I mean you as a person, not like you as in you all. But you as a person will be casted upon by some kind of network that's out there somewhere targeting audiences, and you'll be the only person on the channel. And then they narrowcast it sometimes. Narrowcasting is a public broadcast or a UHF channel usually, but you can narrowcast. I've seen narrowcasting done off of cable. neurocasting, where these guys were like talking to me through the TV. That happens with a lot of film buffs because they watch so many movies and they own so many movies. And we have such a lot to talk about tonight. I'm glad you joined me. This is the Vampire, and we're going to skip the other Ozu one. We had Passing Fancy, and we'll come back to that because that's important actually. But we have the Vampire, and this is interesting because over here, and I'll have to pause for just a second, everybody. I know you're all booing me that I went off screen, but I had to get my other copy of Le Vampire, which is almost an identical copy, and we'll compare and contrast. And I tried my best to give away Le Vampire, but this version cost me about $500 to get because I spent $80 on 4 other copies that never came in the mail, and I got my money back on a couple of them, but that I spent it on the next copy of this is not even generated by the fact that it was $120 a pop each time because I missed the original $60 fee award. And somehow this exact copy was bought for me when I worked at a gas station just to make money for movies. And my gas station boss bought me this for $80. $85. I was like, didn't I owe her money? And she's buying me the collector's edition that we couldn't find anywhere. But look at this. She's got those vampire teeth, and these are not your normal average vampires, because Louis Fouillade may have made the most movies of all time. He worked with Grand Guignol. He used deep focus long takes like Angelopoulos and Ho Shao Shin. And Louis Fouillade always had this trapdoors all over the set. He had his Méliès set up. He didn't use tracking shots very often, but there's a couple of tracking shots when the vehicles are moving and when they're throwing people from trains and stuff that the camera has to move because the movement surrounding it isn't exactly within the frame. And I think Louis Fouillade is totally underrated. No filmmaker buff shouldn't go without him. Greatest movie of all freaking time. Came out before Birth of the Nation. Doesn't have stereotypes. Totally about psychological vampires, not real ones. Although they do drink blood and bite necks. They don't really turn into vampire bats that often. And they don't believe in the supernatural or God or anything. That they have an interchangeable Inquisitor isn't necessarily the case. But as one Inquisitor dies, which wasn't in the plan, they replace it with another Inquisitor. And Irma Vep, who's on the cover of this one, and you notice a lot more foreboding on this copy. Now, this copy I had to import from New York, and it's the Blu-ray, but it has a bunch of the titles written in French, and the episode listing is a little different. And actually, they're the same exact runtime, and they both say 1915 to 1916. Now, we haven't talked about Phantomos yet. But that was in 1913, 1914, so that's starting around the time of Judith and Bethulia, and it's already a 5-hour movie rather than the 40 minutes that Judith of Bethulia was. So now, even before Abel Gance does LaRue, we have Fouillade doing Phantomos, and all these other films that he'd done at the Grand Guignol, which were at that point probably maimed and cooked and baked in everybody's favorite loaf of bread in France, and nobody knew they were eating the film stock of what would have been the most valuable film stock of all time. And now we have Lessons at the Guignol, and Irma Vep's in this gang, and there's other rival gangs, and there's all these underground gangs, and they're all stealing jewels and hypnotizing people and gassing rooms full like they do in the Joker does in Batman. They do that totally in Le Vampire. That Irma Vep can get blown up on a ship and swim to safety is amazing. That she totally eats Durand's girlfriend. And Durand, by the way, at the Grand Guignol, and by the way, Durand is the good detective that's trying to track down the vampires and stop them because he was hired by a rich American millionaire who got a bunch of his jewelry stolen by the vampires, and they keep coming back and stealing from him, and Durand doesn't know how to trace them, and his only sidekick keeps going back and forth and to the other side, and finally his sidekick joins them, and they get their son, one of their adopted nephews with them, and this little kid takes down one of the Inquisitors in an accidental shoot-off. And dude, I mean, this movie is amazing. In the first episode, it's called The Severed Head. You wouldn't believe why it's called The Severed Head. Unlike the movie Seven, which conceals that there's probably a severed head in the box, but they never reveal it. So it's kind of cool in Seven, because you're like, well, they don't reveal it, but we all know it's going to Paltrow's head in a box, because some 5th grader guessed that's what it was, and David Fincher wrote it into the script while he was watching the preview, that there's Gwyneth Paltrow's head in a box. Let's reshoot that so it really looks like a head in a box, but they'll never know. This actually shows the severed head in the box. When they pop open the box, lo and behold, there's a severed head, and by the way, it's the guy they're looking for. Now, Phantomos is real crazy, because in parts of it, the villain that comes out, the Phantomos can shapeshift into all these different characters, so he keeps changing his look, and you can never trace him through the film. Not like these guys like Lon Chaney that had 1,000 faces. I mean, that's cool, but like, I'm talking about shape-shifting to the point that you're a whole different character. Well, the vampire's a little stiffer on the supernatural, except the episode about hypnosis, everybody's tanking each other through hypnosis. One guy hypnotizes a chick. She accidentally hypnotizes like 3 of her friends, and then they go on a hypnotizing run, and so on and so on. Well, meanwhile, the first guy's still setting off these nuclear reactors of hypnosis all around the room, and pretty soon you got vampires stuck all over in weird positions because they're all hypnotized and ready to attack. And I thought, he's in the rival gang. How did he know the occult? I thought the vampires were called that because they were the Satanists, and now all of a sudden you got this magician who can not only do magic, he can also do like things with alchemy. And I'm like, well, I thought that was Venomous, the Inquisitor, that did things with alchemy. How does this guy, who's practically from Spain or something, or Italy, come into this other gang that's trying to convert the vampires away? And at one point, they even get Irma Vep on their side. And Irma Vep, spelled a different way, you know, as an anagram, is vampires. Or vampire. Irma Vep. You rearrange the letters, it says vampire. And she's one of the vampires, and she goes to Moreno, who's his name, Moreno, right? Like, we're going to believe that. And, like, he's stealing jewels, too, and thinks he can take out the vampires who take him out. And then, by the way, that plot kind of dies off, and I kind of made too much of it because it was kind of a sidetrack that doesn't really exist. That Durand is a pretty good detective and a good guy all around. I mean, his girlfriend gets eaten in the second movie, In the Ring That Kills. And you don't see Durand going off on a rant about how he's going to destroy the vampires. But he does say he's going to get the vampires, right? But he doesn't just go on like, maybe he is on a vendetta, but he's smiling and he's happy. And his girl is dead. But, you know, he'll have her in his memory. And meanwhile, he'll bring the traitors to justice that killed her. I can't really give away whether he or Irma Vep wins. But just remember, Irma Vep can escape a ship while it's being blown up and swim back to shore in the harbor.